A McDonald's that served its community for 3 decades has shut its doors permanently, not because customers stopped coming and not because the food suddenly got worse, but because the owner said the numbers no longer worked. And that single closure is just one example of something much larger unfolding across California right now. Before going any further, this is a moment that deserves attention, because what is happening is not theoretical. It is happening in real time, spreading quietly from city to city, neighborhood to neighborhood, and business to business. For 30 years, one franchise owner operated a McDonald's inside San Francisco's Stonestown Galleria, serving generations of families, students, and workers, until one day in June 2024, a simple note appeared on the door explaining that unprecedented economic changes combined with poorly timed legislative mandates had narrowed the path forward to the point where continuing was no longer viable, which translated into a brutal truth that running the restaurant no longer made financial sense. This was not a faceless corporate decision handed down from a distant headquarters. It was the end of a family-run operation built over decades, and that story is being repeated across the state. Over the past year and a half, California's fast food industry has shed somewhere between 10,000 and more than 23,000 jobs, depending on which dataset is examined, and even the most conservative estimates agree that the losses are significant. Pizza Hut eliminated more than 1,200 delivery driver jobs before a major wage law even took effect. Entire regions saw delivery services disappear overnight, and customers were redirected to third-party apps that raised prices and stripped workers of stable employment. Rubio's Coastal Grill, a brand born in California that once operated nearly 200 locations, abruptly shut down dozens of restaurants in a single day and filed for bankruptcy with massive debt and minimal cash, marking its second bankruptcy in just 4 years. Thousands of workers arrived for shifts that no longer existed, learning in real time that their livelihoods had vanished. Altogether, more than 500,000 fast food workers across the state have experienced changes to their hours, income, or employment status, a scale large enough to rival the populations of entire states. The driving force behind much of this shift traces back to April 1, 2024, when California's minimum wage for fast food workers at large chains jumped from $16 an hour to $20 an hour overnight. A 25% increase applied to more than 500,000 workers across roughly 30,000 restaurants. On paper, $20 an hour sounds like progress, translating to over $41,000 annually for full-time work, but the real-world outcomes have been far more complex. Economists from major universities analyzed employment trends and found that California's fast food sector lost tens of thousands of jobs relative to what would have occurred without the wage increase, with employment declining even as fast food jobs grew in the rest of the country. Another independent economic analysis placed the losses even higher, and even a study funded by labor groups supportive of the wage increase conceded that more than 10,000 jobs disappeared, calling it the steepest non-pandemic decline the sector has seen in this century. What makes this more striking is that many layoffs began before the law officially took effect, as franchise owners ran the numbers months in advance and realized they could not sustain existing staffing models. Entire delivery departments were eliminated, long-term workers were offered minimal severance, and the burden of service shifted onto gig platforms that provided no stability and higher costs for customers. Beyond the headlines, the closures of well-known chains masked the quieter struggles of individual operators who faced hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional labor costs annually, forcing painful choices between maintaining equipment, investing in upgrades, or simply keeping the lights on. Some raised menu prices by 5 to 7% in just a few months, others delayed repairs and renovations, and some ultimately shut down entirely. In small towns, the impact was devastating as long-standing locations closed on the same day the wage law began, leaving employees stunned and communities without familiar gathering places. Workers themselves voiced a harsh reality, saying they would rather earn less per hour than earn nothing at all because higher wages meant little when hours were slashed or jobs disappeared. Studies confirmed that nearly 90% of fast food workers in California experienced reduced hours after the wage hike, and more than a third lost additional benefits, meaning many actually took home less money despite higher hourly pay. Employees described fighting for shifts, watching staffing levels shrink, and feeling increased pressure as fewer workers were expected to do more work per shift. Meanwhile, prices rose sharply, with California restaurant costs increasing nearly twice as fast as the national average over the same period, and major chains openly acknowledged that higher labor costs were being passed directly to customers. Nationally, fast food prices have doubled over the past decade, and even executives admitted that lower-income customers were pulling back, finding it cheaper to cook at home than eat at restaurants once known for affordability. Some operators have managed to survive by obsessively controlling costs down to condiment usage and portion sizes, but even they acknowledge that prices cannot rise fast enough to fully offset rising expenses. The pattern is unmistakable. Higher costs lead to higher prices, reduced hours, fewer jobs, and in many cases, permanent closures. California's fast food industry is not disappearing entirely, but it is transforming into something leaner, more expensive, and less accessible, where workers face instability, customers pay more, and small operators struggle to survive while only the most adaptable endure. This is not just about burgers, fries, or drive-through lines. It is about how economic policy, labor costs, and consumer behavior intersect in real life, reshaping communities and livelihoods in ways that will be felt for years. What is unfolding now is a preview of broader changes coming to other sectors, and the decisions being made today will determine whether work remains accessible, businesses remain viable, and affordability remains possible for millions of families across the country. And what makes this situation even more consequential is that fast food has long been one of the most accessible entry points into the workforce, particularly for young people, immigrants, and individuals without formal education or prior experience, meaning that when these jobs vanish or become unstable, there is no easy replacement waiting on the other side. For decades, these restaurants provided predictable schedules, incremental wage growth, and a first step up the economic ladder. But that ladder is now missing rungs as businesses respond to mounting costs by automating ordering, reducing staff per shift, and quietly restructuring operations to survive. Self-order kiosks, mobile-only ordering, and drive-through prioritization are no longer conveniences but necessities imposed by financial pressure. And while technology can increase efficiency, it also permanently removes positions that once employed thousands. Franchise owners describe a constant balancing act where every decision carries consequences: raise prices too much and customers disappear, cut labor too deeply and service collapses, absorb costs internally and the business bleeds cash until it fails. In many cases, the margin for error is already gone, particularly in urban areas where rent, utilities, insurance, and regulatory compliance were already among the highest in the nation before labor costs surged. The result is a slow-motion contraction that does not always make headlines but reshapes daily life. Shorter hours posted on doors, dining rooms closed indefinitely, menu items quietly removed, and locations that once stayed open late now shutting down before dinner ends. For customers, this means longer waits, higher prices, and fewer choices. But for workers, it means unpredictable income, fewer opportunities to advance, and constant uncertainty about whether their location will be next. In communities already struggling with high living costs, the disappearance of these jobs ripples outward, affecting local spending, housing stability, and even transportation patterns as people travel farther for work or food. The irony is that policies designed to improve worker outcomes have, in many cases, reduced total employment and narrowed options, creating winners and losers rather than universal gains. Those who remain employed at higher wages may benefit in the short term, but the shrinking pool of jobs means increased competition, reduced bargaining power, and fewer fallback options when hours are cut or stores close. Over time, this concentrates opportunity in fewer hands and fewer locations, favoring large operators with deep capital reserves while squeezing out independent franchisees who lack the scale to absorb shocks. This same pattern has played out in other highly regulated industries where compliance costs accelerate consolidation and reduce local ownership, leaving communities with fewer decision makers who actually live where they operate. What is happening in California's fast food sector is therefore not an isolated labor story, but a case study in how economic pressure reshapes entire systems, altering who gets to participate, who bears the risk, and who ultimately pays the price. As more data emerges and more closures quietly occur, the long-term consequences become harder to ignore, because once a location shuts down, it rarely returns, and once a job category disappears, it is seldom replaced with something equivalent. The transformation underway now will define what entry-level work looks like in the future, how affordable everyday food remains, and whether small operators can still exist in an environment where the math grows tighter every year. And as this transformation continues, it raises a deeper question that many policymakers avoided confronting before the law took effect. What happens when the economic foundation of an industry erodes faster than alternatives can replace it? Because while higher wages sound straightforward on paper, real-world systems rarely respond in straight lines. Fast food is built on volume, speed, and thin margins, and when one variable changes dramatically, everything else must contort to compensate, often in ways that are invisible until the damage is already done. Operators describe running constant simulations in their heads, calculating labor per transaction, transactions per hour, and how many customers walk away when prices creep up another $1, knowing that one wrong adjustment can push a location from barely surviving into permanent closure. Many owners have stopped opening new locations altogether, choosing instead to consolidate operations, sell off underperforming stores, or exit the state entirely, taking jobs and investment with them. New franchise applications have slowed, renovations are being deferred indefinitely, and equipment upgrades that once improved efficiency are postponed because cash must be preserved for payroll. This creates a stagnation effect where restaurants age, service quality slips, and customer satisfaction declines, reinforcing the cycle of lower traffic and higher pressure. At the same time, the broader labor market does not seamlessly absorb displaced workers because the types of jobs being created often require different skills, schedules, or transportation access, leaving many former fast food employees underemployed or juggling multiple part-time roles to make ends meet. For younger workers, this means fewer chances to gain work experience early, while for older workers, it can mean starting over in entirely new fields with lower stability. The social impact compounds quietly as neighborhoods lose familiar gathering places, late-night options disappear, and small rituals of daily life become more expensive or inconvenient. What once functioned as an affordable meal option for families on tight budgets increasingly becomes a discretionary expense, reshaping how people eat, socialize, and budget. Meanwhile, corporate chains adapt by shifting costs downstream, experimenting with dynamic pricing, shrinking portion sizes, and pushing app-based ordering that rewards frequent users while leaving occasional customers paying more. These strategies help balance spreadsheets, but further distance the industry from its original promise of simple, accessible food at predictable prices. Over time, the cultural identity of fast food changes along with its economics, moving away from ubiquity and toward selective availability, where convenience depends on geography and income rather than sheer presence. This evolution also complicates future policy decisions, because once infrastructure contracts, rebuilding it becomes far more expensive and politically difficult, locking in outcomes long after the original debates have faded. What is unfolding now is therefore not just a reaction to a single wage increase, but a structural recalibration whose effects will be felt for years, shaping employment patterns, consumer behavior, and the viability of small operators across the state. The full consequences will not be measured in headlines alone, but in quieter indicators: fewer help-wanted signs, shorter operating hours, rising menu prices, and communities slowly adjusting to the absence of places they once took for granted, all while the industry continues searching for a sustainable balance that has yet to reveal itself.